Hello and welcome to Sincerely Speaking. I am Marcia Amar and I am so excited for our conversation today because I get to introduce you to my new friend, Anna Zschuppe. I hope I said that right. Okay, cool. The
Yes.
last name is a little hard to pronounce for me. Anyway, so yeah, we met through a common mentor and we had a conversation a few weeks ago and we hit it up right away. And so I invited her to share her wisdom and all her passions with us today on Sincerely Speaking. Anna, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited for you to dive into this conversation with my friend Anna Zschuppe. But before I let you listen in, I would love to extend an invitation to you to connect with me further on my social media and to take advantage of the free 30-minute path paving call that I'm offering. I have opened some dates on my calendar, but they are limited. So go to marciamar.com and schedule your chat so we can talk about what your dream is, how to rediscover your calling, how to get out of your own way so you can do the things that you know you're meant to do in the world, and so that you can elevate your leadership and your communications. So head on over to Marcia Amar and schedule a call right now. And now, without further ado, here's the conversation with Anna. Okay, so let's just get started from the beginning, right? How did you get into your line of work? What is it that you do, first of all? And how did you
Yeah.
develop that passion?
Yeah. Oh, so I am a stress and burnout coach. So I help high achievers and business owners relieve stress, find connection, and regain balance so that they can show up not only for their work and their loved ones, but then also make time for themselves and put themselves first. So I do stress and burnout coaching. I also do career transitions coaching, if someone is looking to find fulfillment in the office as well. And with all of that, I mean, it really got started as for me, like being a teacher in business. So I, since college was always kind of involved in a lot of coaching capacities between being, a soccer coach for youth and then also like a teacher's assistant, publications, like all this kind of stuff. I really liked that. I really liked the concept of coaching. And then I actually transitioned into a human resources consulting position out of college. And I loved being able to work with different businesses on their strategy and vision. And when COVID hit, I did this for about a couple of years, but then when COVID hit, when I wasn't traveling as much anymore, doing the road warrior life every Monday through Thursday out of state, kind of took off the mask or the glamour of human resources consulting. And I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to do full time. Like I like it, but there's something missing. And I went on this journey of really self-discovery and purpose and really understanding like what my passions and what my purpose was. And I thought about like, hey, if I can transform organizations and businesses, like what could it mean to transform somebody's life? And that's really where it got me into this idea of like, oh my gosh, like I want to become a coach. And for me, it was awesome at first. It's like, yes, this is what I love to do. Like, this is awesome. But I had a lot of self-limiting beliefs of, you're too young, starting a business, you're going to fail. Like, what is this? And I ended up putting my dream on pause for about a year and a half or so. And what it really took me into, which, God providing, just so blessed in really diving into an inner healing journey where I really understood where my pains and my fears were coming from, like the root cause of them, and actually getting love and healing in those areas so that I can move forward and find fulfillment both in my life and in my career. And it really like transformed the way I looked at the world. I looked at myself. I interacted with others, and honestly with my coaching as well. So because of that inner healing journey that I did for about a year or so, fast forward to 2021, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to do this full time. And it took me a year to, kind of get involved in coaching, paid coaching, unpaid coaching, starting small as a business owner. And then now, in 2022, I was like, all right, I'm ready to do this full time. So I'm actually coming up on my 1 year anniversary this Saturday. So I'm like,
Yay!
which is crazy. I've already been, a full-time entrepreneur for a year. It's been wonderful. But I think for me to take the courage to take that step, it wasn't only understanding, who I was and what I loved and why I loved it, but it was also like gaining the confidence and courage to actually make that move and build a mindset around it. And again, a lot of those practices that I do, like mind, body, spirit wellness and connection, that holistic healing, getting to the root cause of things, not just of your pains, but really like who you are at the core and what your happiness and joy, how to actually attain that and utilize your body in a way to express that is something that I do in coaching. And that's really why I was so interested in stress and burnout coaching, because it's something that, impacts a lot of people, including myself, and just kind of having that experience and authority to really know what stress and burnout looks like and understand how it impacts us, finding those ways to regain that wellness and connection in a way that's more than just, oh, I'm going to read the next self-help book, or, oh, I'm going to apply logic. It's how do you really use your emotion, but using it in a healthy way, but then also experiencing that compassion and love and confidence that's already within you. It's just a matter of unlocking it. So that's kind of my mission. And that's kind of how I got into coaching.
Well, that's awesome. First of all, let me commend you. Let me commend you for listening to yourself a little bit and going on that exploration journey. I would be curious to know if you agree with my assessment. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about one of the biggest difference between younger people like yourself and not so young people like me is that your generation seems to be aware of having more choices, but with all those choices seems to come almost this decision fatigue that takes over really quickly, right? So what I have experienced, at least in my interaction with younger generations, is that there's all this stress, which leads to your area of expertise, which is also why I'm asking, right? But a lot of that stress comes from this paradox of you're open to all these possibilities, but at the same time, all this decision fatigue seems to be weighing you down. Do you feel that like that's a correct assessment or a fair assessment?
I would say so. I think it's something when it comes to decision making, especially now with social media and technology. It's not like older generations where you're really surrounded around your community and your family unit. Now it's like anyone and everything. So it's almost like the opportunities are endless, which is great in a sense, but it can also be hard, like you said, when it's trying to make a decision, right? Like when you're having some sort of struggle or uncertainty, one of the first things that we do is Google the answer. Like, well, what's the answer? I'm having relationship problems. What should I do next? Is this person the one? You look on Google, right? And you're trying to decide if you should continue pursuing the person. And it's crazy because when you go onto Google, there's thousands of different answers. And I think when it comes to decision making, again, it's when I tell people when it comes to decision making is that it's important to know what your why is behind your decision and be really grounded in that. And again, I think a lot of that comes not only from self-awareness, but also understanding why there is decision fatigue, because it doesn't affect just younger generations. I think they're more exposed to it, but I think it also impacts older generations. And a lot of times that comes from a pain of feeling like you have to perform to receive love, or that you have to make the right decision in order to be seen and valued, when it's really, in actuality, a decision is just figuring out what the next step forward is. And if it's the quote unquote right decision, you'll continue to go down that path. But if it's not in alignment with what you're meant to do and things like that, you'll learn your lesson and redirect yourself. And I tell people that, indecision and inaction is worse than making a decision and taking action. So I give a lot of like strategies and stuff like that when it comes to decision making. But like I said, I think it does impact younger generations more, but at the root of it, right, we can't just blame it on like societal things, but at the root of it, it's how are we addressing this pain, no matter what age you are, so that you can move forward with decisions confidently, efficiently, quickly and authentically.
No, absolutely. And I think that there are two things that affect all of us at some level, but there's a distinction to be made, like we said before, between the older generation and the younger generation. And one of them is what you were mentioning before, the belief systems, right? Like the older generation, we come from a frame more of we were told. Okay, this is the way it's supposed to be, and this is what you're going to follow, and this is where you get to be, right? The younger generation, because of everything that we experienced, we gave them more space and we give them more ability to choose. But then there's all these other things, which leads to the other thing that I think affects all of us, which is the filters, right? So I think that one of the things that I work with people a lot, and I'm sure you do too, is understanding their filters and where they're coming from.
Yeah. It's so true. And it's, like you were saying, it's these belief systems and filters. It's where are these stemming from? Because it's usually, what I tell people, it's usually from your childhood, is that you hook on to some sort of belief system and then you're almost writing a script. So any experience that happens there forward, you're trying to attach an experience to a belief system to confirm it. So it's a matter of how do we actually break down these filters, these belief systems of where they're coming from, and then actually, like I said, getting to the root of it and almost rewriting that script with truth. So it's definitely a thing that impacts a lot of people. So I totally understand and totally agree with where you're coming from in that.
Awesome. So let's backtrack a little bit, because there are words that we use because they're in vogue or because everybody uses them. But when we sit down to really think about what they are, very few of us understand them. And I think stress and anxiety are two of those, right? Like everybody's stressed out and everybody suffers from anxiety. But when we really get down to what is it, very few people really even know. They are just attaching a label based on what they hear. So just to have a working definition, how do you define stress?
That is a really good question. So stress, I tell people, can be good or bad. And stress is an emotional response to something. It's triggering something within you, and there's a response to it. And when it comes to stress, like I said, it could be good or can be bad stress. And what I mean by that is good stress is really focusing on things that, for example, if you're about to hit a deadline, you're like really packed for time, right? And that might give you the motivation to keep going and keep finishing it. But bad stress, I call it, is something that's unhealthy and long-term, that is negatively impacting your thinking, your decision-making, how your body is operating, things like that. So it's not only something that impacts you physiologically, but also psychologically and emotionally. And one of the things that I do within my group coaching program is really understanding, like you were saying, where the stress is stemming from, and two, is it good or bad stress? Because sometimes, like I said, stress can actually motivate you. But if it's getting to a point where, your adrenals are affected, where you don't even know like how to think straight or feel and anything like that, it can hit an area of chaos, right? So again, really understanding where those certain things come from, why, and how it's impacting you. It's like the who, what, where, when, why of who, what, where, when, why, and how of stress, right? So I think there's, again, just so many different facets of it. But at the end of the day, it's really just an emotional response. And we're getting to the understanding, or to the baseline of like, well, why is this emotional response happening? How often, why, and things like that. Again, it's just more noticing than saying, well, okay, I'm stressed. Like, okay, well, let's unpack that a little bit, right?
Yeah, awesome. I love that for a couple of reasons, but the main ones are, first of all, if it's an emotional response, anything that's a response, I have say over, right? And that's where a lot of us kind of miss the mark, is we feel like this is something that's uncontrollable, that it just happens to us and we just get to submit to it. And we're not saying don't feel it and don't experience it, just understand that if it's an emotional response, then you can choose the response if you do the work, right? So that's
exactly.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that is such a huge point, in that I think a lot of people attribute stress to like, okay, well, it's because of work, it's because of my relationships and things like that. Like I call them the external circumstances, right? But really, again, that emotional response is an internal circumstance. So it's within your control that you can manage. I hate using that word manage, but just keeping in check, if you will, because I think a lot of that not only is like the emotional response, but like before an emotional response comes the thought. And the thought that you think can be positive or can be negative. And when it's negative, it usually leads to more of those emotional responses of stress, anxiety, nervousness, things like that. So it's even like the thought that you're thinking before that response even happens. And it takes a while for us. Again, I think a lot of it revolves around an inner healing journey, but I think it takes a little bit for us to understand like what those thoughts actually are, how they're actually impacting us. Because I think we subconsciously think them, not consciously. So it's almost, again, peeling back those onion layers and being able to maintain that inner locus of control, because the circumstances you can't control. Like you can't control a pandemic happening, you can't control investments and sales and things like that going up and down, like the market going up and down, but you can control how you think, how you feel, and how you act or what you say because of those things.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And so that's the one thing I like about your definition. The other thing I like is that every response has a trigger, right? We cannot respond to nothing. So if we can spot patterns in the triggers, that is a huge first step, is it not?
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's all about the cycles and seeing where those cycles pop up. And it's so funny because I have people, like I said, I do stress and burnout coaching and career transitions coaching. So oftentimes I have people coming in for career transition stuff. I'm like, well, okay, like I need a resume, I need LinkedIn. I'm like, okay, that's like awesome. You probably do. Like, no doubt about that. But like, let's talk about some of these other things that you're saying, that you're hopping from job to job to job, or you're feeling like you're defeated or overthinking in your process. And I ask the question of, well, for example, the thing of overthinking, right? I'm like, well, where has overthinking popped up in your life other than your career? And people are like, oh, I've never thought about that, but I see it in all these areas. I'm like, yeah, we're going to start identifying and breaking some of those cycles, which is just so amazing. And once you start really doing the patterns and the cycles and identifying them, breaking them, like reforming them, like literally creating new neurological pathways of thinking, the better that it's going to be for you in order for you to show up for yourself, for your relationships, for other people, work, etc. And then I tell people, after all of that, then we can get into the strategy stuff of resume, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. But I think there are some important steps first before diving into some of those things. So
Absolutely. And it's awareness or really paying attention, becoming aware of things without the self-judgment, right? Because I remember, for instance, in my own life, at one point I sat down to revamp my resume, and I realized that even though I taught for 20 some odd years, I would switch schools every 3 years. Like I couldn't stay in one place more than 3 years. And that got me to thinking, okay, what is it that happens at the 3-year mark? That is making me do all these things. But if I stopped to be like, oh, why can't you just stick with one thing, and fell into judgment and self-criticism, that would have taken me in a completely different direction.
So true. It's so true. Shame and inner critic are one of those big cycle creators. That's actually like, again, you're thinking a thought, your emotion, and then your words or actions is that you're creating harsh, unrealistic expectations on yourself or others. So that's like that's a huge trigger. We were talking about triggers before. That's a huge trigger and trap. That's one of the methods I use in my program, is like the trigger trap method, is like, what's the trigger and what's the trap that you're getting into because of it? And shame is one of them. Shame is a huge one. And I tell people that as they're breaking some of these cycles and patterns, and like you said, going on this personal inner healing and self-development journey, it's giving yourself grace of like, hey, I'm learning how to, identify some of these cycles and patterns. I'm trying to understand why every 3 years, I switched to a new school for teaching, right? So it's giving yourself that grace and compassion rather than the hardness and the criticism. And you almost have to think of it, I tell people, you almost have to think of it as if you were talking to your friend. Mm-hmm. Would you talk to your friend and say like, oh my gosh, like, what are you doing? How awful are you to switch every 3 years? No, we would never say that to them, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's so easy for ourselves to look at the mirror and judge ourselves and criticize ourselves, when in actuality, what we're really needing is just like love and compassion before we start diving into, the strategy and breaking cycles and patterns of things. So
that's awesome. Now, for someone who is considering and saying, okay, I hate everything that's going on in my life. I feel dissatisfied, unfulfilled. I should just transition into something new. How do you start assessing, right, whether that transition is in fact what is needed versus working on something else like the burnout or the stress piece?
Yeah. So someone who is wanting a career transition and they're like, what kind of transition do I actually want to do? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really understanding why they want to do the transition in the first place, because there are people who are actually like, they actually do want to make a transition of like, hey, like my example, right? I was like, hey, consulting, I don't really know if it's aligning with my values and what I want to do going forward. So I want to try something new, right? So there's that. But I think there are also people who are transitioning to escape. And that's where it becomes problematic. And that's why I ask those questions of like, well, what are you wanting to transition into? Why? And what makes you excited about it? If the answer is, oh, well, I'm just transitioning into coaching to like make more money, or, oh, like to have time freedom, like, okay, let's talk about that a little bit and reconsider that. Because really, when it comes to transitions, this is kind of like one of the baseline assessments that I do, aside from just asking these questions, is really understanding like, well, what is your purpose and what are your values? What are your passions and what are your strengths? And using those combined, how are you carrying those out in this next role or your current job, right? So it's understanding some of those. And I tell people, once you understand your purpose, which is what you can do both for yourself and for others, not just for others, but like also yourself, then going forward, any decision, action, words, things like that has to be in alignment with your purpose. So again, before even we talk about like, okay, what are the tactics for transitioning? It's really understanding, okay, why do you want to transition and what do you want to transition into? And how does that align with your purpose? So that when you go into that next role, whether it is in fact staying in that same role or industry or completely pivoting, that you're going to be able to feel intrinsically motivated to get up each and every day, even when it's hard to, or even when you feel busy and things like that. Because I think so often people just transition to escape. I'm like, no, you're just escaping into another problem and it's just going to repeat again. So
where I come from in Puerto Rico, we have a saying that loosely translates to the fever is not in the sheets, right? Which means that if you are hopping from thing to thing to thing and all you're doing is trying to escape something, you're actually taking that with you because you're going with you, right? So it's about exploring really what the source is and getting down to the bottom of it.
Yeah. And like I said, it's not just careers. Think about people in relationships who jump from person to person to person to person. It's like, okay, well, why is this happening? What is your purpose? What are your values? What are your non-negotiables? What do you stand by? So that when you go into the next relationship, you're thinking about those things of, is this person in alignment with who I am and who I want to become and what my goals are in life and how we can work together for that, right? So it's about like pulling back. I don't want to call it like short-term pain, but it's just like pulling back and thinking about some of these big questions and ideas in the short term for the long-term strategy so that you're winning in the long term, as opposed to having to do it over and over and over and over and over again. So
That is really cool and really important, because I think that we all have the capability of, if we really sit down and are open to being uncomfortable for a minute, we all have the capability of getting to that space where we see it, right? Like, I think most of us at some point have a realization of this might be it, but then it's too painful to go through the process of really analyzing it and sticking with it. But when we are able to be uncomfortable and sit with it and really examine it and feel it and look at it, I think we have that capability of getting to this point, to the point where we say, okay, that's probably it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to being in your uncomfort zone, right? If you're in your comfort zone, you're never going to grow. You're never going to develop. You have to get into a state of uncomfortability. I don't even know if that's the word. That discomfort. Thank you. I'm like, uncomfortability is not the right word. But
it's okay. We can point it.
It's fine. But you have to be in your discomfort in order to grow and to develop. And one of the things I tell people when they're thinking about, okay, what do you want to do down the line, is like, it's not as far as you think out. It's how can you actually start thinking about what your future reality looks like, and thinking about what you can do in the present day to manifest it. That is super, super important to know, not only where you're headed toward, but knowing that that destination is not like eons down the road. It's the sooner that you put it more into the present day, doing certain things, feeling certain things, experiencing certain things, the more that you're going to be able to track to that. So I tell people, it's how do you envision what this future self looks like for you and why you want it, and how you can go about doing it today, which I think for me is one of the big things that I love about coaching. Is this is where like the strategy and the action planning come in, of like, okay, now that you're, healed and you know what you want to do and why, and, eliminating all of these self-limiting beliefs, how do you actually start putting this into a strategy? How do we actually start making your dreams a reality? So it's like both of those things of being in this state of discomfort, but then also manifesting your future reality in the present day. That's going to be key in order to transition, whether it's in your life or things in your career or both.
Absolutely. So it's the backwards design, right? This is where I want to go. So what do I need to do before that? And what do I need to do before that? And until I get to right now.
Exactly.
That's awesome. All right. So we are coming up to the end of our time. It just flies when I have fun people like you on here. But before we go, two things. First of all, final thoughts that you would like to share with everybody. And second, and most importantly, how can anybody contact you if they want to learn more about what you do?
Yeah. Last and final thoughts is, for people who are listening to this, is if you're struggling, whether it's in your life or in your career, maybe you feel disconnected, just know that that confidence, that happiness, that joy that you're seeking is already inside of you. It's already there. It's already inside of you. And you've been made for just such a wonderful and unique purpose. And just going into that and exploring it is going to be so key to unlocking that confidence and happiness. So that's kind of a thought I have for people. And if anyone needs help in understanding and discovering what their purpose is, you can always reach out to me. I actually have a group coaching program. It's a 16-week program called the Meant for More program. And we dive into just some of those things we were talking about today. How do you get clear in where your stress is coming from? And, how you can also understand who you are and who you want to become. But then the confidence piece of actually tackling some of those self-limiting beliefs and maybe breaking some of those patterns and cycles that might be hindering you. And then the commitment piece of the strategy and action to actually get it there. So again, if anyone's feeling stuck in that, I'm more than happy to help. And just to book a call with me, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you and your goals and passions, all that kind of stuff. But for people who want to get in touch with me to learn more, I have a couple of different ways to do so. I would say Facebook is going to be the main one, not only on my personal page, Anna Zschuppe, but then also I have a Facebook group called the Soothing Stress Collective. And we have a lot of discussions. live videos, exclusive access to free day challenges, just all this kind of stuff that gives a little bit flavor into what mind, body, spirit, wellness, and connection look like. You can also catch me on YouTube at Anna Zschuppe Coach, and then connect with me on LinkedIn as well, Anna Zschuppe. And and then from there we can get talking and learn a little bit more about you. So
Awesome.
That's how you can get a hold of me.
I will make sure to put all those links in the show notes so that you can just click and find Anna. Anna, thank you so much for spending this time with us. As I expected, it was such a fun conversation with so much value added. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Marcy. I appreciate you.
See you soon. Thank you for spending this time with us here on Sincerely Speaking. We don't take your time lightly. We know you have a million other things you could be doing. So I hope this conversation has been of value to you. And if it has, I invite you to share it with someone else in your life who could benefit from it. And I will see you next week on Sincerely Speaking. Bye-bye.